Hello and welcome. This is the second devlog in a series about building a 3D stealth game from scratch. If you missed my previous video, it's not required to understand this one, but definitely worth a look. Anyway, let's get into the new stuff. The first thing I've been working on was textures. Looking at that checker pattern was getting a little repetitive. So I started working on the art style. It's still just an early experiment, but you can see I settled on using pixel art. Pixel art is a fairly quick to make and easy to change art style, which is perfect since I'll have to do it all myself. But this is a 3D game, and everything is much harder in 3D, pixel art being no exception here. For pixel art textures to look good in 3D, I'll have to create normal maps and add just enough additional rendering geometry to allow the engine to generate detailed shadows. Since the camera moves, I can't paint the same types of contrast changes that make pixel art so recognizable in modern 2D games. Lighting isn't implemented just yet, so for now I've painted some details to keep the textures looking interesting. Moving on, I've made some improvements to the editor. The brush now has a wireframe, so it can be seen even when its geometry is being culled. This was becoming a problem when rotating walls and having them face away from the camera, which would make them invisible. The wireframe turns red when the brush is disabled. This can happen if painting will generate a duplicate or if the geometry is crossing the boundary of a room. Rooms are one of the spatial partitioning methods this engine uses. Spatial partitioning is a performance enhancement that allows an engine to locate objects in space more efficiently. I'll go more in depth with spatial partitioning in a later video when I've implemented streaming, which will allow the game to have few, if any, loading screens. I've also added a new prefab type. The flat levels were getting a little stale, so I added ramps. And for the first ramp, I created some stairs. Stairs are the first prefab to utilize the separation of collision and rendering in an interesting way. The rendering model has regular 90-degree angle steps, while the collision model uses inclines for each step. Without the inclines, the character would detect each step as a wall because wall detection is only done based on the angle of the collision triangle's normal, not the location of the triangle. In order to have the character go upstairs, he would need to know he's on stairs. This would require a character state for being on stairs and subsequently a new state for many existing states. Going prone on stairs, for instance, would either need to be impossible or work differently, which would be a lot of additional checks. To avoid all that additional work, I decided to make stairs a collection of inclines. This makes each step a mild hill the character climbs, but since each step is a hill, the character will still bounce up, creating a smooth transition. It's not as perfect as having custom stair climbing animations, but as a solo dev, I need to use old school tricks like this to keep the game moving forward, or it'll never get finished. Next up is tiling. In order to allow things like flooring to have variation and detail, I gave the editor the ability to rotate the prefabs by replacing them with entirely new prefabs. By doing this, if I rotated a corner, for example, it gets replaced with the next corner. In a similar way, I added the ability to have alternate variations, which lets me add things like damaged flooring. Together, these improvements give the editor a full tiling system, allowing for more complex flooring, walls, and pretty much everything else, while greatly simplifying its usability. And the last thing I've been working on is the first real gameplay element, which is doors. Adding doors to the editor required some additional work because they are the first objects for the game and the editor couldn't handle objects yet. The brush needed a new mode to allow placing and configuring objects. What I implemented is having the library give the brush a geometry representation to display, in this case the door itself, and when placing the object, the library configures the object and hands it to the brush. The brush places it in the current room, and the room loads it like it normally would when playing the game. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, but there are a few things I'm going to change before adding more objects to the game. Right now the environment is created from a prefab set, which dispenses the prefabs that make the environment. Rooms support multiple concurrent prefab sets, which allow for mixing many together. Since prefab sets can be mixed together in each room, it makes sense to store common things like doors in their own set. Since the doors will be used throughout the game, having them in each prefab set would be pretty redundant. There'd be a lot of copies. The same goes for item pickups, security cameras, and things like that. So that's probably what I'll work on next. I want object placement to work as smoothly as the environment creation does now. That means standardizing on the asset creation process as well. And combining everything into individual prefab sets will definitely help with that. So that's about it. I'm pretty happy with the progress. The past 2 weeks were pretty productive. I only procrastinated a little bit. Come on, where's my instant gratification? I'm just kidding. I love you, Carl. Not even. Come back, though. So that's it for my progress this time. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to subscribe. This channel is dedicated to this and won't contain other content, so don't be afraid to turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.